Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, Israelis reckon with a post-October 7th world.
We can't even process what we've been through because we are in the trauma. We are just waiting them to come home.
So how has Israeli society been affected by this past year? I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. This week, Israel marked 1 year since Hamas's October 7th attack, with commemorations across the country. More than 1,000 people were killed, and about 250 were captured. It was the deadliest attack in the country's history.
This is where she was killed. So, especially here. We were last week, we were in the grave, but this is the ceremony. This is where she was. This is where she was happy in the last her moments. It was here.
In the years since, Israel's war on Gaza has killed over 40,000 Palestinians, a number likely to be much higher due to those still buried under rubble or in areas inaccessible to medical teams. To its north, Israel and Hezbollah have been exchanging fire throughout the year. But in recent weeks, Israeli attacks have expanded further into Lebanon, killing more than 2,000 people. So what does the war look like through the lens of Israeli society?
The scope and the level of what's happening on the ground here for all involved is an earthquake, and it's something that I think we don't know yet how it's going to pan out. My name is Mairav Zonszein, and I'm the senior Israel analyst with the International Crisis Group.
Welcome back to The Take, and thank you for being here on what I can only imagine is a heavy week. This week marks 1 year since Hamas's October 7th attacks in Israel. And you wrote in a New York Times opinion piece published this week that many Israelis are asking themselves some pretty tough existential questions. What are some of those questions, and how are you seeing people grapple with them?
Well, I mean, it's hard to speak about Israelis as a monolith. It's quite a divided society, and there's a lot of different types of Israelis, of course. So I don't want to be too sweeping, but your question, I think, pertains mostly to the ones who have been protesting for a hostage deal and who have been calling for early elections and who want this government out. And they're part of the liberal secular elite in Israel. I think a lot of them are asking themselves, will this war ever end and lead to long-term security? Can I raise my kids here? Does the government have my interests in mind? Will the hostages ever be freed? A lot of questions about what this country is about. If the country hasn't prioritized, which I think is the conventional wisdom here, it has not prioritized stopping the war to save civilian lives, Israeli civilian lives, then what is this place about? This place was supposed to be a safe haven for Jewish people. Of course, there's a lot of problematics with that, but if you just look at what Israel is supposed to be, a place for Jewish people to feel safe and to be able to live freely, then you have a quagmire, you have an internal contradiction, because this government has prioritized military force and crushing the enemy, and not so much the saving of civilians, including a baby, including elderly. So that's something that's very hard for people to wrap their heads around. And we're a year in. So at this point, I think some people like me are resigned to believe that there may never be a ceasefire hostage deal, that it's just going to go on and on and on.
Wow. You mentioned rightly that no society is a monolith, of course. And so I wonder, in talking about this segment of society, how palpable that feels personally to you. Are these conversations that you hear in the grocery store, or that you're having when you're out with friends or picking up your kids from school? How tangible would you say that feeling is in Israel?
I think it's something that's kind of being collectively expressed through the protests that have been, even before October 7th, there were protests against this government and its judicial overhaul plans, but you feel it literally in the signs that you see in the protests. For me, it's not so much happening in the conversations. My experience from my day-to-day is actually that most Israelis aren't talking about the real issues. And obviously they're very focused on their own security and, what this government is doing internally to them, but they're not talking about what's being done to others, and also about why this use of force, not just in Gaza, but especially now in Lebanon, is not necessarily or almost surely not going to lead to a better place. So that's what's really, I think, missing. Israelis are grappling amongst themselves all the time. I mean, many people like me who have kids and who have the means are considering leaving. That's been quite, I think, rampant over the last year. But the questions about where we're going to go from here and how we're going to be able to come out of the worst violence that I think Israelis and Palestinians have ever experienced, I don't think people are really asking themselves that.
I want to pick up on one of the things you mentioned, which is people who have the means, who are deciding to leave Israel. Because one of the ways that this enormous shift, this enormous event that happened last year, it's had an impact on the country's psyche. You can see it. And one of those ways that it's playing out is in this displacement, whether it is involuntary, with thousands moved from northern towns and southern villages as this war expands, or voluntarily, with data showing that thousands of Israelis are choosing to leave the country if they can. What does that say to you about how Israeli society has changed over the past year? Do you think those numbers are overblown, or is that does that feel like a true phenomenon?
It's definitely a true phenomenon, but it's, in terms of the statistics, it's a very fluid and dynamic thing. It's hard to assess. And, this type of thing has been something that Israel's been going through for years, where they talk about a brain drain. They talk about how educated liberals are leaving for various reasons, also aside from the war, because the economy here is extreme and insane, and it's very hard to purchase a home here, no matter how hard you work or how much you serve in the army. So there's other factors in mind. But Israel is really a shrunken country. There's the displaced residents, and then there's those who would like to avoid the war, would like to avoid the situation, especially for their kids. So you have a lot of people who have left for a few months and then come back, or people have relocated but might return. So it's hard to say, but I can say that the mood here is of despair on a level that I don't think I've never experienced, because every time, there's so many things happening, like 200 ballistic missiles from Iran one day. There's a rocket siren. You don't know if it's from Yemen or from Lebanon or from Gaza. And I mean, that's just too much for a young family to deal with on a daily basis, especially when there's no discussion of an end game. It's just endless war. So I think anybody with a head on their shoulders would want to seek a way out of that. But then you do also have a lot of people who don't have the option to leave, or who are very rooted here, or who want to fight. They want to fight for a better future here. So there's also a tiny left in Israel, an anti-occupation, anti-apartheid left. They're tiny. They don't have political strength, but they are committed. They are committed to trying to make this place better. There's the liberal elite that I referred to. They also really want to fight to make it better here. So there's all kinds. There's all types.
You mentioned a young family and what the impetus that would get them to move. And I wonder, from your perspective and from what you know from others, when you hear those raids, does it become like background noise, or is it still as ever present 1 year on that we should do something about it, that we have to run, that we have to grab our go bag, that we have to go into our shelter?
Every time there's a rocket siren, it's a traumatic moment. It's something. And again, like I can't compare it to what people in Gaza or Lebanon are going through, because they don't have sirens and they don't necessarily have shelters. So obviously it's important to keep the proportion in mind. But it's not a normal situation. It's just not a normal situation for anyone to live in. Just the other night, there was a siren after 11 p.m. You pull your 2-year-old out of his bed, and then you somehow, after 10 minutes, are supposed to just go back to sleep. as if nothing happened. I mean, nobody can get used to that. Again, we're lucky, we're lucky, we're able to be protected on some level, but what's really disturbing is that it has become so routine, and that the loss of life in general on all sides, certainly on the other side, the non-Israeli side, but also just the routine of living like this hasn't reached a fever pitch where people say enough, where people say stop the war, because even the hostage deal protest is not about ending the war. They understand that is what needs to happen, maybe. But it's not about stopping the carnage. And for me, that's really hard to wrap my head around.
Yeah. I want to stay on that for a moment because I wonder if it surprises you doing the work you do, and knowing the landscape as you do, if that surprises you that small number of anti-occupation population that you mentioned earlier, if it hasn't grown, or if this was just to be expected because of how big of a seismic shift this was for Israel as a country.
I mean, the October 7th attack and the ensuing multi-front war of attrition is something that has moved Israelis more to the right. I think a lot of Israelis feel, certainly Israeli officials who are determining much of what happens here, they feel that there's no negotiating with non-state actors that they consider terror groups, that they consider to be committed to the destruction of Israel. And for a lot of Israelis, the context doesn't matter, because they feel like no matter what they do, certain people will always want to try to kill them or destroy the country. Whether or not that's true, that's how they feel, and it's a legitimate feeling. After
the break, how are Israelis opposed to the war in Gaza grappling with how it's being carried out? So, Mairav, I want to talk about a point I've heard you make since at least 6 months into this war, if not sooner, and that's on news appearances and in op-eds, on this sense of apathy among many Israelis to what the Israeli military is doing in their name. You wrote about it again this week, saying that Israeli disregard for Palestinian suffering, whether conscious or not, has been one of the most palpable and disturbing features of life in Israel since October 7th. So we've touched on this a little bit, but I'm wondering how have you felt that absence?
I felt it literally by it being absent. I mean, the absence has been deafening. It's just not something that people talk about. It's not something that comes up. Certainly it doesn't come up in the media here, but it doesn't come up in conversations. There was a lot of civil society organizing to help people who were affected after October 7th, to help soldiers get to different places that, because there wasn't public transportation, all of this kind of organizing. And never once has there been any organizing that has to do with the Palestinians. Now, that's not just in Gaza. It's also in the West Bank. It's also in Jerusalem. It's also inside Israel. I mean, this gets talked about almost not at all, but Palestinian citizens of Israel make up 20% of the population. They've been going through their own war here. I mean, they've been silenced. They've been fired for Facebook posts. They've been arrested for protesting. Their freedom to protest is completely repressed. And of course, these were patterns that happened before, but they're on steroids now after October 7th. Nobody is talking about that. And so when you have Jewish Israelis protesting for a hostage deal, and they're also starting to get roughed up by the police, they're starting to realize maybe that, what your opinion is, not just what your ethnicity is going to affect how you're treated by the state. But they're still not making the connection to the fact that if you have a society and a government that treats people a certain way, what is going to stop them from treating you that way? I mean, that's something that I'm hoping more and more people are realizing.
You mentioned the media. So I want to talk about the Israeli media and what role they have played in this war. There are a couple of clips that I want to play, examples of things that have been said on Israeli news channels by journalists or commentators over this past year.
לדעתי, צה"ל היה יכול לתת מכת פתיחה כואבת יותר עם 100,000 הרוגים, בהתחלה, כן.
פשע מלחמה זה אני, אתה רגל על הגב. פשע מלחמה זה אני מודה, אני אגיד את זה פה, לא אכפת לי שירדו עליי, הרי אוספים פה חומרים. אני לא נרדם טוב בלי שאני רואה בתים קורסים בעזה. מה אני אעשה? עוד בתים, עוד מגדלים, שלא יהיה להם לאן לחזור.
האנשים האלה שם מוות. מוות קשה, מוות בייסורים, ובמקום זה אנחנו רואים אותם מבלים בים, ובסטלבט שלהם, ובכיף שלהם. האנשים האלה, אין שם חפים מפשע ברצועת עזה, ובכיף שלהם, האנשים האלה, אין שם חפים.
Of course, these are some of the seemingly more extreme examples out there, but I'm wondering how representative it feels to you when you're clicking through channels. This rhetoric that we showcase here, is it other places, or is this just the right wing, or is it a reflection of what the society is, the society that you said has already moved to the right?
First of all, besides the media, you have the leading government officials talking about a siege on Gaza and stopping food, fuel, and water. I mean, you've had enough of it. The ICJ has gone through those, genocidal rhetoric already, so it's well documented. So it's not just the media, it's the government. And in terms of the public, there's a spectrum. I mean, there's people who are more indifferent or apathetic, as I've written about. And then there's people who are not apathetic and very much interested in hurting, targeting, expelling, destroying Palestinian life. Mm. And to me, I mean, this is part of a culture of impunity that has gone on and culminated in this war in Israel for years, in which both internally Palestinians have been dehumanized. Soldiers who do horrible things to Palestinians are not ever tried. I mean, ever is a strong word, very rarely. Settler violence, Israeli civilians living in the occupied West Bank almost never get convicted for assaulting Palestinians. So you have this culture. And then on top of it, you have a US administration that has given carte blanche to Israel to do as it wants. And so this all contributes to a culture and a phenomenon in which Israel feels like it can do whatever it wants. And of course, after October 7th, it feels all the more legitimized to do it again. This isn't new. It's just a lot more exacerbated now. So it's true that some of the clips you played are of the more extreme, but those sentiments are all across the public here. And more to the point, even if somebody doesn't feel that way, they're not getting up on a soapbox and saying this needs to stop.
Yeah. Mairav, I want to end with the fact that what is palpable from this conversation, and from anyone who follows you on social media, is that you are someone who does care about what's happening to Palestinians in Gaza. It's something you write about, speak about, engage with regularly. You're not the only one. As we mentioned at the top of this conversation, no society, and Israeli society, is not a monolith. But from what you're saying, it is a small minority, or at least it feels like a small minority. So I wonder, for those who do care about what's going on in their name in Gaza, and as this expands, does that get lonely?
Yeah, it's definitely lonely, but luckily I do have a small community here and elsewhere, colleagues all over the Middle East who are trying to work towards something better. It's something that's very hard. It's an emotionally difficult thing to grapple with. I mean, I think we don't even realize the toll that it takes on us. And again, I'm speaking from a place of privilege and a place of relative safety compared to the rest of the region. But for me, I just feel that the excessive use of military force and the total lack of restraint, and also the lack of the appearance of restraint. It's not even that there isn't a fact. It's not even like they don't even want to look like they're abiding by laws anymore. I mean, that's how blatant it is. And so that has ramifications for every single person in the world. What's being done here is going to have consequences for everyone. It's really breaking the notion that there are still some basic rules of engagement or basic moral order. And so if there's no restraint on that, then anything could happen. I mean, when Israel decides to bomb a site to get one, let's say, Hamas militant or whoever, and is willing to kill 200 people to do that, then what's to say that, they're not going to do the same thing to Israelis? They want to kill one Israeli military official or government politician, so they'll also kill 200 Israelis. I mean, that's not a world I think most people want to live in. So there's a reason why there's international humanitarian law and international human rights and conflict resolution, and there's a reason why people call for ceasefires. It's because violence usually only begets more violence. It's not, there's this, the escalation towards de-escalation, I don't think has ever proved to work. Certainly not here.
And that's The Take. If conversations like these are important to you, give this episode a thumbs up and let us know in the comments. And remember to subscribe to the Al Jazeera English channel here on YouTube.